So I guess we can get started. In the room here, I have Nina, Divakar, Trevor, Ergin, Rilling, and on the call I have Dave, Huni, Ian, Jeff, Ron, Veve. Have I missed anybody? Okay. So on our agenda today we have updates on action items, and we also have a presentation outline for the core development team at the BioCADI All Hands meeting. I've generated. Hi, somebody just joined.
It's Dawe.
Oh, okay. And we also want to talk about mapping of DATS2, mapping to DATS2 actually, and Jeff wants to just go over the transformation script that they've generated, where they've mapped PDV to DATS2 completely, and we'd like to discuss that. And we also want to talk about what a dataset means for BioCADI. This was a discussion point that came up in the meeting with Alejandra last week on Thursday, and this has also been an issue that has come up in multiple issues that were reported. So an example for this is the datasets as defined in GEO versus what we think or what we are defining as a dataset. And Rilling has a brief presentation of sharing of login with CEDA, which is one of the action items that we had talked about earlier. So we would like to discuss that within the group before we talk with CEDA about it. And then if time permits, we could talk maybe briefly about inclusion of more repositories into DataMed, which is a discussion we had very briefly last time, but then didn't continue too much because Jeff was not on the call last week. And even though I have updates from all team members all the time, I don't know if we'll have enough time to talk about it. So last week's action items are, again, this is something that's ongoing. We all know that we are going to be mapping to DATS2 once it's kind of more or less finalized now. And once that's done, then Jeff's team will do the indexing and then let the UT Health team know so that the UI can be updated. And the video.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things is that there have been, there are a number of groups that did some of the other repositories, so they need to update the mappings as well. So that's, one of the questions.
So Jeff, if you remember, we had an Excel spreadsheet which had which repositories were worked on by which group.
Right.
So I guess we could just follow that. I actually did update that, so we can go over that during the call. I updated it saying that we probably would want to update the same Excel spreadsheet and if we are going to have additional new repositories coming in, then we could have information about who's working on it as well as what the current status was, like how we did for version 1. I think that would be useful.
Right, and with 2.1 finalized, it would probably be good to have the different groups do one, to begin with, that we can then just double check and review, so that everyone sort of understands 2.1, what's being mapped to.
Okay. And as for the recording of the timestamps for queries and results retrieved to determine the response time, Rilling has completed that on the development server, but for checking on the DataMed server, I think they want to wait until we have done the mapping and we have the updated repositories on the UI before they go ahead with the checking. So this the link out discussion is on the action items just so that we don't forget about it, and we will revisit this a little while later. And the login sharing with Cedar was also an action item that Trilling was supposed to do, which she will present on, I guess, in a couple of minutes. So this is the core dev team presentation for the BioCaddy All Hands meeting. We have about 90 minutes for our presentation, and I just put this out by myself, but I'd like to get feedback. We talked about this at the EC meeting, and one of the suggestions which came from George was that we could potentially have the presenters kind of grouped together so that there's not so much of a exchange of people at the podium. So the suggestion was to have all the presentations that Hua would do to be grouped together up front. Does that seem like a reasonable flow in terms of the presentation itself?
I know this is Ron. That sounds like a good idea, and I think it would make for a smoother presentation. You may want to look into the topics so that was composite, because he's talking about introduction to DataMed in one place, user interface in another, and data set retrieval challenges in another. To group that together so that it appears to be a cohesive presentation and not three separate, disparate entities.
So the plan, I guess, was to group introduction to DataMed and user interface together, and then have Jeff present the ingestion and indexing pipeline. Then Trevor could talk about, or Todd could talk about, we could switch Trevor and Todd if we want, where Todd could talk about usability and user testing, and Trevor would talk about the system evaluation. And then either Trevor can talk about the challenge, because he's been involved as well. Briefly, I think we're allowed to.
Well, that definitely makes sense to have those two topics.
Right, together, right? And then either Hua or Trevor can talk about the challenge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one idea might be to put the user interface, usability and testing right after the user interface component, right?
Okay.
And then switch into the indexing pipeline, and then the system evaluation, that talks about the benchmark data set, and then the data set retrieval challenge.
Okay. All right, that sounds.
The goal should be to do this in a time frame that allows for a significant discussion as well.
Right, so we have actually 90 minutes, which is quite a bit of time, I think. So the original plan was to have maybe, the way Elizabeth split it up, it was, what she said was we would have about 15 minutes for each module, but I think if we are going to, group it the way we're talking about, it's probably quite a bit of time, and we could have questions at that time as well, right?
No, this is Dawei.
Hi, David.
I have a question that I think we asked the team that there's a very important aspect of the data matter is.
Dawei, it's a little hard to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Difficulty hearing. That's better.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think I think there's some questions about the scalability issues of the data mat. That in terms of volume of complexity, I'm wondering which part, or are you planning to cover that aspect in that presentation?
Well, part of it, I'll cover that partly in suggesting indexing, but we can also add then, some slides in the overall architecture piece, to point to, Elasticsearch and scalability there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And also, what we would like to do is to get the slides from everybody prior to the all hands and have a single slide deck so that the transitions go smoother. So Jeff, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So again,
Do you want me to make you a presenter, or I can share my screen and you can look at the transformation script?
I mean, it might be. It doesn't really. I mean, you can make me a presenter, and then I can. Controls go. Okay. Oops, sorry, just trying to find my share my screen button. Okay, so what do people see?
We see GitHub.
Okay, my bad. Just making sure I have the right screen sort of set up. Okay, so in terms of the okay, can people? Is that better?
That's quite readable.
Okay. So just in terms of the transformations, again, this is for the mainly for the the core dev team in terms of what's been looked at. I mean, there are a number of aspects of the data set information, sort of like the data set aggregation. So is this an instance or a collection? So these are all things that have come up in sort of the DATS 2.1. There's privacy for the data set. The type of data set it is, what it contains. And so these are all pieces that are sort of new in DATS in 2.1, and then there's also the distribution section below. So there are a number of different things that have been added to the transforms to handle that. And so the distributions themselves have information about the individual file. So, for example, this is the PDB XML. And so this is the new sort of distribution layout from the latest DATS in terms of information about specific distributions. And we didn't really have a lot of distribution information in the prior version. So this is something that we'll need to figure out also how to bring into the UI at some point, is the distribution information. So PDB has actually a lot of different distributions that are part of that. And for some of them, there's an access type for the distributions. And so here, there's a difference between, for example, the JS mole is a JavaScript mole viewer, which is for viewing, whereas the other access types are for download. Again, these are sort of UI considerations. Trying to find. Oops. That's all basic. Yeah, standard. When we look at the data set release information. So one of the other things is that the data set release information in discussions has also been moved to a separate section. Well, it can be moved. It can either be in the distribution area, or it can be in the main data set area, because a lot of the dates reply to the data set as a whole. And so one of the additional changes was to move this date, to move the dates also at the data set level, so that that can be handled. So, I mean, those are some of the main sort of changes and updates, mainly in terms of handling the distributions and some of those other pieces. So some of this information, main reason to bring it up on the call today is that some of these might, down the road lead to UI enhancements. So just wanted to sort of touch on those very briefly.
I mean, it begs the question, Jeff, if we're making changes in the model, what's the intent behind them if they don't surface as being something that's A, searchable, and or B, displayed in the results?
Yeah. I mean, the question is how they're displayed in the results.
Well,
so,
I mean,
the
that's
data
one
set
part
distribution.
Of the question I mean, you say it may affect what's in the UI. I mean,
right.
How I think of an enhanced data model is, which is what that is this is in some sense an improved, and improved can mean many things. It could mean richer, it could mean leaner, but an improved data model for the purposes and the functionality of the application. So at one level, I'm trying to understand why are we doing this? What does it change in terms of functionality that benefits end users?
So the main change. I mean,
how does that too move things forward?
So the main changes have been with the data set distributions. That was a major area where things were changed, and also in how one describes overall what a data set is.
I understand that, but I'm not sure.
So that part is something for easily classification of data sets. The data set distribution piece has been discussed on prior calls as something that we want to add to the UI, and so this is sort of the new information that can be then used to display that information, because this also holds information about if an external repository is holding the data and if that's primary and things like that. So this data set distribution is something we've discussed in the past as something that would be incorporated in the UI. And now it's in the model, fully defined and clarified. So we can now use that data.
Okay. But, I mean, the benefit for it really doesn't accrue until it appears in the UI. Other than that, it's just sitting somewhere in a database behind the scenes.
So Jeff, I have a question about, so in the items not included, all the way down, there's a transformation column which is supposed to get transformed to citation count.
The citation, because that's handled by a separate process. It's not pulled from the document itself. So this goes to the citation database. Yeah. So
that's why we are not
just like the NLP data.
Mm-hmm.
So the NLP data. So for example, if I look at Okay, that should be big enough. So this is what the JSON the JSON looks like, and if we scroll down here past all the core parts, you can see then some of the other information. So this data set didn't have citations, I don't think, but we can see the NLP. So the NLP generator here. So we have a new collection in terms of provenance that we talked about with Philippe adding, and then this is the NLP fields that were pulled from this this PubMed entry.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean that's the main thing. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the areas because they were tied into some prior discussions, and so plan is for Alejandro wasn't able to make this call, and Philippe is on vacation, so I'm actually landing in the UK on Thursday, and so I'll talk to we'll have a call with Alejandro on Thursday evening UK time to sort of review the transform, sort of what we did in terms of collating this information from the discussions and the description of the model, and to sort of do a pass back through Alejandro and Philippe just to verify everything, and then relates to the point earlier I knew about then, pushing through the data sets and the new data sets, and just basically start processing everything we have and adding the new repositories.
Okay.
So, Jeff, how does a change like this go through a development tier, through testing, and out into what would be seen by the people to whom we've given the links to DataMed to evaluate, and how does that get rolled out?
So I mean the rollout with because it is tied to the UI, right? And so once we start releasing the updated data sets, with the additional information, then there's going to be, as Anu mentioned, there's sort of the binding that occurs with the UI, for the new model, and then at some point there'll be a new release sort of pushed to the first it will be deployed in the development zone that's at UT Health, and then at one point it gets pushed out then to production.
So the thing that I guess I'm getting at, and it's not apparent to me, we're talking about a system that people use in some sense and have some visibility to, and you're talking about a fairly substantial change to that system. And it's a question of how do you look at the before and after? How do you look at, what's improved, what's changed here? How do you manage it? The people who are using the system appreciate that it's something that's changing, dynamically. It's just, in a sense, we know that Google changes Google all the time. But that's a problem to some extent because, it starts behaving differently and you don't really know why. And if it's useful, it seems to me, as a user, to have some sense of how the system you're using is behaving, and that there's some new version of it that's going to behave differently, and we're rolling out a new version in some sense. I don't see a clear plan as to how we're making that visible to people.
Well, I mean, I
So
think part of
when
it, yeah, and you can.
sorry, when we moved the system from point 5 to version 1, for example, we did have on the landing page of DataMed, we had a list of what was new in version 1. And this is in spite of the fact that for point 5 visibility was fairly restricted versus version 1 where it's more visible. One option is
Right.
also to send out emails to people that we could send it out to who have, created accounts or have emails registered with us. But if it's a user who's been using the system without registering in DataMed, then the only way of displaying the changes is to have it displayed on the landing page, on the home page.
So when you roll it out, maybe there ought to be a banner across the top, version 1.2 or 1. Whatever it is, and new features and a link to that, so it shows people what the continuity is and what is new, and how that may help improve their use of DataMed.
Right. I mean, and that's when we rolled it out. But at this stage, the thing that I find is still tricky to put my finger on is what's the feature set that results from this. And I can see, for example, I can extrapolate from the changes in the model that there's the sense in the data model now of the distribution. And my understanding of what that means is you've got a data set, but it can be distributed in different formats. As we saw, PDB can be in PDB XML. And then there was another format. I've picked up your cough, Jeff. So it's useful for all of us involved at this stage to know, well, what's the feature set that's resulting from this, and also being able to see and saying, hey, this feature set is one that we've heard from users who've been providing feedback is being important. So it's a question here, and I'm sure this exists, it's just not visible. It's the question of what's the traceability from the issues that have been coming in or other requests for functionality. How do we trace through from that to what's appearing in the application? Because what's important to us, or what's important to me, is seeing that there's a responsiveness to features and needs which are coming from the community of users. And maybe that's very apparent to you all, but it's not necessarily apparent to all of us.
So one option is
No,
to
go ahead.
have it in GitHub and say, okay, this feature was implemented, and in the comments, if that's of use.
This is Dawi.
There
have
are well-established ways of doing this kind of traceability.
Yeah, I think this Dawi. I think I have a kind of similar question. I think the thing is that if you change some format or system, it may not be at the level that you can say this is the main feature changes.
Right.
Sometimes I think it is that if, like say, you make the process transparent, like when you have a hit, and then people can know what features that really contribute to that hit, and then what is the raw data. So if they can have, like say, the user can play around with it, and then know what is the how the results come from, and that may be a way to help understand, what the system has been changed or not.
Yeah, I mean one other one other thing to notice about with the update to DATS is that it's also driven, by metadata export for repositories and the like, right? So it sort of sits between the UI. So some of the updates, are UI based. So some of the stuff with the distributions and all that is because there's certain things that we've discussed putting in the UI at some point, right? But some of the other parts of the model, have been updated or modified based on, the feedback from repositories and the like. So it's sort of the connective tissue, right? From the repositories to the UI. So I just wanted to add that also as a clarification that some of the changes actually relate back to feedback from repositories, right? It's not just the UI that is driven these changes.
Right. But I think I would take this to the level, and absolutely, the repository is a very important source of feedback around functionality in DataMed. But broadly, the question is, how do you? I mean, all of the features need to be tracked to something like that. We need to make sure that we're capturing that feedback from whichever source it comes. And I've long advocated that having a single mechanism to do that just keeps things really simple. It doesn't matter where it comes from. If it goes into GitHub, whether it comes from an end user or whether it comes from a repository. Once you go to, that's the whole point of an issue tracking system, is that you've got it all in one place and you can track it and you can triage it and act upon it and see where things came from and keep track of how things are moving forward. Because I think it will serve the project well. I mean, that's really the metrics on the project by which we can show that BioCaddy is responding to and is fulfilling needs that come from, I'm going to call it its stakeholder community rather than its user community, because I think stakeholder is probably, user. Some people might not include repositories think of repositories as users.
Yeah, and as Anu mentioned, I mean, the interface changes are being tracked in GitHub, and then the separate repository has the DAT issues. So they should all be in GitHub.
They are all in GitHub, except that they're all in their own. They're all in GitHub within BioCaddy organization, but most of the interface and other primary features that the users, not necessarily the repositories, but other users have suggested are listed under the prototype issues. I guess what has been done with reference to the metadata model, all issues associated with that have gone into the metadata working group 3 repository.
So I think the bottom line, I think the bottom line is that these are ongoing changes that are occurring. They are in response to community or stakeholder issues, and they need to be documented as such so that we at the NIH can track it and that the community kind of follow in a logical way what you're doing and how it's resulting in increased value.
Right.
So however you choose to do it, Ian's point is well taken, that we need to be able to see it. There needs to be transparency.
So, okay, I guess we'll look into this a little bit again to see if we can link GitHub issues and to the features that are in the development version of BioCaddy.
Can I suggest that you just take it offline with Ian?
Right. I will do that.
And work it through.
Yeah. So one of the issues that came up is with regard to data sets in Geo. I think this is issue number 87, for which I have a link here, but basically this comes back to the issue of how Geo defines its data sets versus how we have defined our data sets, or if there have been changes in the way Geo has been defining its data set. So one thing that was noticed is that in the latest version of Geo, we have a lower number of data sets as compared to what was put in as the number of data sets in the earlier version. And Jeff pointed out that if you look at the browser right now, there are actually even more than what was ingested in Geo earlier. By earlier, I mean probably a month or a month and a half earlier to what they have right now. So it seems to be like they are redefining their data set description. And so the question right now, I guess Jeff should be able to articulate this much better than I do, is to whether we have to index this at the data set level or at the sample level is the first question. And I think this also came up a couple of times even when we were talking with Alejandra on Thursday, is that we need a data set definition by BioCaddy. Because when we were talking about the model and about the data set distribution, there was a question as to whether or as to how we are defining the data set in BioCaddy to be able to define whether it was actually a data set or a data set distribution that we were looking at.
I mean, my feeling is that from what you're describing, if my understanding is correct, the difference between those two things, a data set distribution and a data set, I mean, there's a one-to-many relationship there.
Right.
I think in general, right, a data set is, in my mind, the set of data which results from some study on a particular topic, right? It's on a particular disease, for example, in a particular species, looking at a particular set of independent variables that they designed their experiment around. And that's kind of the unit that I think most people think of as a data set. You were alluding to something which was talking about things at the sample level. Now, I'm not clear about why we're getting this discrepancy of number of hits, but what if we're indexing samples rather than sets of samples? I think we've got off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
The things there are multiple samples in that study. No, we don't index at the sample level. We're indexing at the set level. the general sense that from multiple discussions, that I think that's the essence of the thing we're calling a data set.
Yeah, I think that's also what drove that change in the representation.
Yeah. So that maybe that issue 48, it maybe I submitted.
You did.
And I think actually for me, like say as a more like say bioinformatician, I may not care about how do you define the data set, because that's going to be changed over time anyway. But I think it will be like interesting to me is like say, if I can figure it out that how that 121 hit can be generated like in DataMed, and then I can figure out like how the how the hit was generated in Geo, and once I understand that, I can work it out by myself. I think the earlier discussion that we had is that I don't know how to get that information from DataMed to figure out how that 121 hit is being generated. I think that's the transparency that probably we need to provide somehow.
So Jeff, you investigated Darway's original question and you commented on it, and Todd did, and
yeah. So I mean, the question is, how do we? I mean, it gets to sort of documentation of what a data.
Well, I mean, getting back without getting into that question, what's the difference between 121 and 7610?
121 and hold on. If you go back to the prior that had the numbers on it. Oh, the 121 versus the 70, because the 7610 is the samples.
Okay.
I believe, right? Yeah, if I right. It's because Geo when it does because it has a specialized search interface for the samples and things like that. It bumped in the slide, Anu.
Oh, okay.
They return that box, right? Yeah, right there. So they say, like, if you search for something, they'll say, like, data sets, and then, that has so many series, so many samples across so many platforms.
So I would say BioCAD is doing the right thing here, in my opinion.
Yeah, so the question gets back to Dawei's point about how to make that clear as to what's happening, or because if you go to, because I think if you go just to the stand, if you remember correctly when I did this, if you just go to the NCBI site and search Geo,
I just did. Right.
It dumps you into the samples view, I think.
Yeah, well, it tells me,
right?
it's clear enough. It tells me, I've just done the search, it tells me there are 48 data sets, 685 series, 7,000 samples, and 81 platforms. And I can choose what I want. But given that BioCAD, so in this instance, my question would be different. Geo says there are 48 data sets to do with HIV, whereas DataMed is telling me, according to this, there are 121. Though actually looking at the numbers that are listed on this screen here, say 1271 data sets.
So you're getting more in DataMed.
Well, it depends on what I'm comparing it with, is what I'm saying, Jeff. I'm looking at the screen, right, that Anu is sharing. and it's comparing 121 hit. Well, I don't know whether that listing where it says dataset, series, samples, platforms, which already says
That's
1
not
through 7.
from the same.
Okay.
I guess this is from
All right.
what.
Well, the numbers from the. All right. In that case, thanks for that. So, if you do a simple query for geo datasets in the NCBI interface, the numbers you get are 48 datasets, 685 series, 7049 samples, and 81 platforms.
So the way the 7610 data set hits that you got it's a little dated, right? I mean, it's probably about
Yeah,
1 month
that
ago.
was probably several months ago.
Yeah.
So I think actually
I think maybe Geo's changed something.
Yeah, I think so. Like say, for example, or just make sure like making the my point clear. I think if you use Geo to search HIV, and when they return back, they give you an interface like say the bolded HIV in the text, and then they say this is why this hit is up there because there is some matching there. And then if say I do the data map search, and then there is some that type of information as well. But how like say like I know like say I think there is some of that is kind of PDD. Like say there's some like in the title, some is I don't see like in the text. So like say what is the decision making process for data mat? Say this is 121 hit.
I mean, so the addition, the one of the differences is going to be the semantic expansion through the ontologies.
Yeah, I think that's. I think Jeff. I think what I'm thinking that what are kind of the reason that it make a difference. I think is not necessarily bad or good. I just like make that process clear to people, and then they can, the people can figure out what its reason is.
Right. But
so maybe a little back page about.
I think the other aspect would be useful to know when you're running that query that way, what are you trying to find out about HIV when you do that? And then the most important question is whether DataMed is helping you to do what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
So a user putting in this query can come away with one of two interpretations. One is you get 121 hits from Geo and 7,600 from Geo and DataMed, and then that many more from NCBI. Is that the DataMed hits are more focused. Alternatively, you can say, well, DataMed missed all of this that NCBI is catching. So I think
the difference, Ron, is that Geo will count different things for you.
Well, that's right, but a user coming in here is not going to know that a priori.
Well, the thing they need to know here is that what DataMed is searching is for data sets, and we need to be clear about what we mean by a data set. But that's really the purpose of. Yeah, I think we've got to keep BioCaddy focused on the idea was, the whole need for this was for people to be able to find data sets. So that's why BioCaddy is giving us a data set count.
I mean, perhaps, adding a fact page or something that describes some of this. Like
That's
why
not a
you might
bad
see
idea, yeah.
differences, or something, some questions and answers.
Mhm. Okay.
Because there's always going to be, because one of the primary issues that this act, highlights is that because data repositories have a very, in a sense, constrained view in terms of their data type, they can do a lot of things customized to that data type that one might not be able to do in, a more higher level sort of search interface. And this sort of points to one of them because they're, geo-represented in one way and we're representing it sort of in another way.
Okay. I'll let Rilin talk about the sharing of login information with CEDA.
So CEDA is using Clock for their identity and access management. So in order to log into DataMed using CEDA account, for DataMed website, first we need to install the Clock OAuth 2.0 package for PHP. And on our user interface, we need to add a button to allow users to log in using CEDA account. For CEDA group, I think they are already running the authentication server. So they need to create a new realm for DataMed website and then provide the information like the server URL, realm name, and client ID for us. So then their authentication server need to validate the login information, and we will redirect users to the DataMed website. So that's the whole workflow.
So take us back, Ruling, and remind us why would we, this is in order to do what? You'd want to be logged into CEDA. Why would a user want to do that? What would they be trying to do?
So I guess the idea was, last time when we talked with the CEDA folks, we've been developing the BioCaddy template in CEDA. And when the user creates it in CEDA, if they have to submit it to BioCaddy, instead of having them come and log in again in BioCaddy to be able to submit it.
I just wanted to make
so this is kind of to make some kind of connection between CEDA and BioCaddy.
Yeah. Right. And sorry if I'm asking you to reiterate something which I know I think I've been advocating that we look into, but I think it's important in these conversations that we keep these things, the end user functionality, front and center. So the bottom line is, it is good to be able to log into these systems, multiple systems, with accounts from one another.
That's
the thing
right.
I want to connect this discussion with is, Ruling, you had looked into at some point being able to log into BioCaddy with the PubMed logins and the NIH, I think what's called the NIH or the federated login. And with this need that's occurring here, it seems whether we might begin to ask the question is whether something like that might become a common denominator or a common infrastructure for different projects. Because otherwise, the end result is we're going to end up with, think about every pairwise combination of elements of BD2K that we've got to deal with a pairwise login to each of them versus using something which already exists, which if both systems were using, this is kind of like how you see many sites use their, you know, you can use your Facebook login to get into this system. The option of you could use your PubMed ID to get on into both of these systems might be one that we want to start advocating would be a good idea.
So Ian, I remember that when we were talking about looking into my NCBI ID as a login mechanism, that we had talked about getting somebody from NCBI involved first thing, and the second thing was that I don't remember where the information came from, but that there was a feeling that it was going to be opened up for us to be able to access, like the way Google login is accessible. But I don't know if that has happened yet.
That what was going to be opened up?
The NCBI, where you could have potentially people logging in to multiple systems with the with their MyNCBI account.
Right. I think it's already opened up.
I think more important is actually to think what we actually want to accomplish with the login function, because you're only talking about authentication. But more importantly, the authorization is the part which is tricky. What do we want to do with the users that as long as they are logged in? Do you want to just keep preferences or no history and stuff like that? Or do we actually give them different functionality or different capabilities or access to specific sections based on their ID? Authentication, I think, is the biggest issue that right now we are tackling, but authorization we have to focus on as a deeper level to see what we actually want to accomplish with this.
I mean, it's almost certain you'll need authorization. I mean, if somebody creates a particular form or template with CEDA, you want to control access to that. So, I mean,
but then we have to see, do we delegate the authorization to CEDA? Do we keep it in-house? Do we authorize or do we control all the authorizations locally, or we distribute that to the institutions that have the users, or how do we want to deal with this? It's a completely different problem.
Yeah, I think I think those all need to be dealt with, but I think they're all problems that can be dealt, you know, that aren't too hard to deal with. But it seems, I mean, it's sounding, Anu, that we need to follow through on this more with NCBI. But what this is doing is, I mean, the fact that this issue has come up adds momentum to the value of doing that.
Okay. So I guess we are out of time. Right now we are already over time, so we can talk about this next week. But this is something that I had shared already last week, where we had the spreadsheets. So these three spreadsheets essentially are the three spreadsheets that are in the resources folder of the BioCaddy GitHub. I'm sorry, not GitHub, Google Drive. So which is open and everybody has access to that. We can look into the three spreadsheets. They actually are a list of all NIH-supported repositories. The second one is the updated one that Stephanie did, where she added additional information that she pulled in with regard to access and authorization and file formats that the repositories support, as well as I think she added some extra repositories that she pulled in from BioSharing. The third spreadsheet is actually the one which talks about the list of repositories for DataMed version 2 release, and I think that's the major spreadsheet that we want to be looking at to update and then go back and look at the groups that actually did the metadata mapping so that we can update, the same groups can update the mapping to that too. So this is the list of GitHub issues that we do have currently. We have formed actually a small subgroup here at UT Health where we've been looking at the issues, and we have actually, if there are issues where the user has submitted something and the issue has been dealt with, we've gotten in touch with the user, and if the user hasn't responded back to us in about 2 weeks' time, we are closing the issues. Okay, I think that's it. I think we'll skip looking at the ongoing work this time, and then we can get back to this if time permits next week. Again, a reminder for everybody who's writing codes, please do deposit them in GitHub. You can create your own private repository under Biocardia organization and deposit the codes. And let me know if you need access. I just wanted to ask if there were any other issues that we wanted to talk about. If not, I think that'll be it for today. Thank you all for coming in.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.